We're all used to going out with friends, and one of the rites of passage among friends is the good old road trip. Tunes on, everyone singing silly shenanigans, usually a good time had by all. Even when you go wrong and perhaps get lost, it's normally just a minor hitch in the plan. But in rural New York State in 2023, the wrong turn would turn out to be deadly. This is the case of Kaylin Gillis, and this is Murder of Crows. Hebron is a town in Washington County, New York. It is part of the Glens Falls Metropolitan Statistical Area. The town population was 1,773 at the 2000 census. The town is named after the ancient city of Hebron in the present-day West Bank. Hebron's beautiful hills and valleys are part of the Slate Valley of the Upper Taconic Mountains, with Taconic meaning in the trees, and part of the Great Appalachian Valley, also known just as the Great Valley. Thus, many of the main hills, valleys, creeks and roads run diagonally across Hebron in keeping with the general outlay of the Appalachians. Hebron is notably at once a nexus between valley regions within the Great Valley and also between mountain regions. The nexus of the Champlain and Hudson valleys is located here. The taller peaks of the Taconics are on the Vermont side of the border and begin to dwindle comparatively into foothills in Hebron. Hebron can be described as the foothills between the Adirondack Mountains of New York and the Taconic and Green Mountains of Vermont. Hebron thus is at once at a high point dividing valleys and a lowland dividing mountain areas. Are you keeping up? It's a geographic nightmare. According to the United States Census Bureau, the town has a total area of 56.4 square miles, or 146 square kilometers, of which 56.2 square miles, or 146 square kilometers is land, and 0.2 square miles, or 0.52 kilometers squared is water. The eastern town line of Hebron is the Vermont border, and the beginning of New England proper. The town of Salem is adjacent to the south. Aside from geographic notability, it would be fair to say that nothing really ever happens here. Well, almost nothing. In April of 2023, it would become the centre of a controversial death investigation centered on 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis. Kaylin Gillis was born on February the 23rd, 2003, and lived in Schuylerville, New York, and graduated from Schuylerville High School in 2021. On April 15, 2023, Kaylin was one of a group of young adults, teenagers, 20-somethings, that had been invited to a party within the tiny burg of Hebron. At 9:45 p.m. they turned onto what they thought was Hebron Hills Road, where this totally happening party was supposed to be taking place. They would learn soon enough that it was actually a private driveway. Under normal circumstances, their error wouldn't have been an offence punishable by death. But unfortunately for Kaylin Gillis, that's exactly how this simple wrong turn would turn out. Those who survived the hideous events of that night recalled that Kaylin and two friends had been passengers in an SUV driven by her boyfriend, Blake Walsh. Two others had been in a separate vehicle, while another person had been on a motorbike. When they were 30 or so yards from the residence, the girl behind the wheel of the second vehicle rolled down her window and told the entire group that it appeared they had the wrong house. There were no lights on and nothing to indicate that any sort of party was happening there. Now, as this group of young people were preparing to leave, having realised their mistake, the motorcycle started to sputter, suggesting it was about to stall, prompting the rider to rev the engine a couple of times to stop it from stalling. In a matter of seconds, lights came on both in and outside of the home. At that point, they had been on the property for a maximum of 3 minutes. The motorcycle had already left, and the other vehicles were in the process of turning around when a man appeared on the porch with a gun in hand. Without warning, he levelled the weapon in their direction, before firing 2 shots in the span of 5 seconds. As screams erupted from inside the SUV, the backseat passengers tried to phone 911 but could not get a signal. And it was in those desperate moments, as they raced to get help, they realised that Kaylin was not moving. When they attempted to rouse her, they saw that she had been shot in the neck. Once they were back on the main road, the group were able to contact paramedics, who met up with them 10 minutes from the site of the shooting on the unfortunately named Cemetery Road. Though first responders had done everything they could to save Kaylin's life, she was pronounced dead a short time later. At around the same time that the events on Cemetery Road were unfolding, residents of the wider area where the shooting had occurred were calling 911 to report the sound of gunshots. Aware at that point that there had been a fatality involving a firearm in the vicinity, officers from the local police department, accompanied by state troopers, made their way up the long, winding driveway that led to the house on Patterson Hill Road, assuming that the two events were linked and the shots were likely fired on this property. Now, to say that the homeowner was less than cooperative would be an understatement. After refusing to open the door or engage with authorities, 65-year-old Kevin Monaghan had complained to a 911 operator that patrol cars were congregated in his driveway. He mourned that he was an old man who needed his sleep, stating, "I want to go back to bed. I wish they'd leave me alone." Following a standoff involving an hour of sometimes heated back and forth, Monaghan finally agreed to come out peacefully. When questioned by police, he had initially insisted that he and his wife had been sound asleep at the time of the shooting. But coming to the realization that no one believed a word he was saying, he ended up telling the truth, or as close as this kind of man would ever come to it. According to Monaghan, he and his wife Jinx, don't ask me, had been startled by the sound of a ruckus in their driveway. Fearing that they were under siege, he had told her to hide in the closet. After peering out and seeing the person on the motorcycle holding a cell phone, he had immediately leapt to the conclusion that they were calling for reinforcements. Believing that an attack was imminent, he had grabbed a shotgun and gone outside to confront the invaders. In his version of events, he had fired a warning shot to scare the would-be assailants away. As he turned to go back inside, he had stumbled, causing the weapon to discharge. Oh! And it was the second shot that killed Kaylin Gillis. To bolster his story, Monaghan added that the gun was defective and would sometimes fire even when no one had pulled the trigger. He insisted that if his gun had killed someone, it certainly hadn't been intentional. "It was the gun, Your Honour. Nothing to do with little old me." When the 20-gauge shotgun was inspected, there were no fingerprints to be found. Tellingly, the barrel had also been cleaned, effectively removing any evidence that it had been recently fired. No shells, spent or otherwise, were recovered. Convinced that Kevin Monaghan had willfully shot at the vehicles with no regard for the lives of those inside, officers placed him under arrest.
Charges after he fired 2 shots at a car that mistakenly turned down his driveway. One of those shots killed a 20-year-old woman who was riding in the car with her friends while they were trying to find a friend's house. It was dark with no cell service in a very rural area, and one of the friends realized that they were at the wrong place. The suspect came out onto the porch and fired 2 shots. One of the shots hit 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis. The friends were able to drive away and find cell service, but Kaylin did not survive before they could get any help. Investigators do not believe there was any interaction between the suspect and the group in the car before he opened fire.
The following day, April the 16th, Monaghan was formally charged with second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with evidence. After entering a plea of not guilty, because of course he did, he was ordered held without bond pending trial. When investigators spoke with Monaghan's neighbours, very few had anything good to say about the ill-tempered man who lived at the top of the hill. It sounds like a nursery rhyme gone batshit crazy. Known as a hothead who was always looking for a reason to stir up trouble, he was someone most of them avoided whenever possible. It was common knowledge among locals that few things got under Monaghan's skin like lost travellers turning onto his driveway. Even though the long meandering stretch leading up the hill to his house looked very much like a back road, he wasn't happy with that as an excuse. To him, anyone who entered his domain, whatever the reason, was a potential threat to his safety and that of his wife. In an attempt to put an end to the problem, Monaghan had erected a sign near the entrance to his property, informing motorists that it was a private drive. But even so, the issue continued. Whether this was a result of indifference or the fact that the sign could easily be missed, especially at night, is up for debate. A look into his past showed that he had been arrested in Vermont in 2001 for assault with a deadly weapon. He never served any jail time and the charges were eventually dropped. Happily married for several decades, Monaghan and Jinx, who were childless, seemed to be an island unto themselves. Armed to the gills and believing that nearly everyone was a threat to their personal safety, they had apparently eyed outsiders with more suspicion than most. The trial got underway on January the 8th, 2024. In her role as hostile witness, Jinx had taken the stand to say that she had been hiding and thus hadn't seen what happened on the night in question. Convenient, I would say. Though she had heard gunshots, she had no way of knowing who was doing the shooting. Testifying in his own defence, Monaghan had cracked jokes and basically made a mockery of the ongoing proceedings, overly confident in his belief that he would be walking out of the courtroom a free man. In the process, he had rubbed everyone the wrong way, including the presiding judge, who would later admonish him for his appalling display of disrespect. On January the 23rd, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. 3 months later, Monaghan received a sentence of 25 years to life, plus an additional 21 months to 4 years on the lesser charges. The judge made a point of saying that he believed Monaghan, who was incapable of owning his wrongdoing, would do the same again if the opportunity arose. When the judge's decision was rendered, The gallery, which included family members and friends of Kaylin, all wearing shirts sporting her smiling face, erupted in applause as the convicted murderer was being led out of the courtroom in shackles. Someone had yelled, "Coward." And it was hard to deny that that word fit Monaghan very, very well.
Custody of the New York State Department.
For the first time, family and loved ones got to have their voices heard directly addressing the man who killed Kaylin Gillis. Judge Adam Michelini, who presided over this trial, also spoke directly to the convicted murderer today, saying when considering the sentence to impose, he weighed in if he thinks Kevin Monaghan could hurt someone again in the future.
With you, I think you really could possibly do the same thing again. It's obvious to me that you feel justified. You don't take any responsibility for the outcome of your actions.
Judge Michelini also recalled what Monaghan said when he took the stand during the trial, testifying in his own defense.
You senselessly took the life of Kaylin Gillis, and you have the gall to sit here and talk about how you plan to finish up the work on your house and race motocross in the future? You don't deserve that.
True mercy is free.
Both sides today got a final chance to make their case for what they feel is a just sentence. Assistant District Attorney Christian Morris.
Kevin Monaghan was merciless in his judgment to act that night. And the question here then would be, should he be shown mercy? And based on that, the answer is no.
And defense attorney Arthur Frost.
I don't come here to ask you for mercy. I ask you to rebuff vengeance. I ask you to do what is just.
When given the opportunity, Kevin Monaghan chose not to speak today, only saying this.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Ultimately, Judge Michelini imposed the maximum sentence.
You murdered Kaylin Gillis, you shot at a car full of people, and you didn't care what would happen, and you repeatedly lied about it. You deserve to spend the maximum time in prison allowable under our law. I sentence you to a term of 25 years to life in prison.
Though Monaghan is safely locked away and will not be eligible for parole until 2050, at which point he will be 92, the lasting effects of his horrifying actions live on. The survivors of that encounter lost their innocence that night. They now live with the realization that the slightest error can end in violence. It's terribly sad when common sense has fallen by the wayside, replaced by the belief that a nameless, faceless enemy is always just around the corner waiting to strike. While Monaghan expressed regret that a young woman was killed, he has never publicly shown any remorse for his actions. If anything, he has done the opposite, openly spouting his belief that he had a right to defend his property against intruders. The fact that Kaylin and the others never made any attempt to exit their vehicles and were in fact in the process of turning around to leave when the shooting took place seemed to have been lost on him. Given his neighbour's assertions that he was becoming increasingly unhinged by the number of people using his driveway as a turnaround spot after they seemingly made a wrong turn, it would appear that the arrival of the group of partygoers had been the last straw. With his frame of mind, it was bound to happen sooner or later, and April the 15th was the night Monaghan's tolerance seemingly reached its end point. It was later determined that the house the group was looking for was a half-mile down the main road. Just half a mile in a rural setting. So a mistake that anyone could easily have made, especially at night in an unfamiliar area. This tiny mistake, which amounted to roughly 1 minute of drive time, was the difference between life and death for Kaylin Gillis, whose light was forever snuffed out by a man whose paranoia had eclipsed any sense of human decency he may have once had. He was a man who was always likely to blow at the first sign of any changes to his isolated life. It was probably only this isolation that had prevented anything happening before it did. But he was nonetheless a ticking time bomb that was looking for an excuse to explode. When he did, he took an innocent young woman to her grave, and the rest of her friend group were traumatized for the rest of their lives. Kaylin was the subject of many tributes and vigils to celebrate her short but meaningful life.
There is a celebration of life for Kaylin Gillis tomorrow. We've been sharing the impact this young woman has had on her community and beyond, and we continue to learn more from a beautiful and touching obituary written for Kaylin Gillis.
Kaylin Gillis was the glue of her family. The oldest of 3 daughters, she turned 20 2 months ago. Family was always number one. The touching obituary says she never missed a Sunday dinner at Mimi's. Kaylin loved tacos, cheeseburgers, and ice cream. Kaylin was a Disney fanatic. She knew every movie hero and princess, her favorite characters, Mickey Mouse and Stitch. Kaylin's father sharing some words about his beautiful daughter.
She was so smart. She was so smart, kind, loving. She had so many friends. The outreach from everyone around the world has been incredible.
She wanted to be a veterinarian or a marine biologist. She loved animals. Goats and dolphins were her favorite. And she was an avid artist. Her artwork still on display at Schuylerville High School 2 years after she graduated. The school superintendent sharing this about Kaylin.
I'm sure you've seen that picture so many times, and that speaks to her. The love in her face, the picture of her with the 2 dogs. That's kind of how she demonstrated herself to the school community and with her peers.
Kaylin lit up every room. It was part of her natural instinct to always do the next right thing.
Kaylin deserves to have her story told, and what a beautiful person she was, and how many people loved her, and
Kaylin was clearly very much loved, and her death at just 20 years old served to show that life can change in an instant. So remember to hug your loved ones and always say the things you want to say. Of course, instances of events like this are extremely rare, but they serve to remind us that life needs to be cherished. This episode is dedicated to this caring and loving young woman who was just going to a party with her friends when tragedy struck, taking the form of a curmudgeonly old cockwomble. I send love to all of those impacted by this dreadful incident. Thank Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much. Please consider subscribing if you haven't yet. And please leave a like and a comment with your thoughts on this case. But with that said, I'm Steve. This is Samson. And we will see you when we see you.